So everybody on their computer should have SketchUp, I'm guessing 2016 and 2017. You can see here on my computer that I have both. It doesn't really matter which one you use. We might as well use 2017 if it's on there. I'm guessing 2018. Probably already, I'm sure already exists as well. And as I mentioned earlier, you can get a free version of SketchUp at home. So for those of you that do like to work at home a little bit and continue to practice, you can get SketchUp Make at home. Now, what are the differences between SketchUp Make and SketchUp Pro? What we have here at school is SketchUp Pro, okay? They're mostly the same. In fact, I even have SketchUp Make on my office computer. It does everything that I really need it to be. SketchUp Pro, though, does have some additional exporting options. You can export bigger files, bigger renderings, and along with a variety of different file types. So those are just a couple of the pros and the cons. But for the average person, man, the average person, all right, once. Resume. So we're going to go ahead and open up SketchUp 2017 or 16, whatever you want. We'll go ahead and agree to that, continue. And the first thing that you're going to be presented with when you open up SketchUp is you're going to have the ability to choose a template or also start using SketchUp. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and click on Start Using SketchUp, and then you're going to have to choose a template. Okay, so you can click on Select a Template, and we're going to click on Architectural Design or Simple. Either one will work the same. Feet and inches. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use Architectural Design. The reason why, I think the only difference is the green versus the gray background. So it's a little bit more of a simpler background in architectural. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and click on Start Using SketchUp. Okay, and that'll take a second to open up. And all right. Eventually, tick tock. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to ignore this. All right, and so here we have our basic SketchUp interface. Okay, so I won't spend a ton of time going over this because most of you probably already know it, but I'm going to teach you probably 5 or 6 of the most basic commands, and those that know SketchUp know that that's about all you really need to know to be good at SketchUp. Just understanding these few basic components will take you a long way. Okay, so up here in the top is going to be your main ribbon. This is called the simple tool set or the basic tool set. All right, similar to Photoshop and some of the other programs we have talked about in the past, we also have this tool set over here on the right hand side. This has things like the ability to turn on and off shadows or layers. We're going to talk about styles and scenes today, along with the ability to add materials and other different components. Okay, so the other thing that I like to also use is if you go up to View and you click on Toolbars, we're going to turn on the large tool set. Okay, it's right under Getting Started. Okay, and I'm going to click on Large Tool Set, and you'll notice that it about doubles, or if not, yeah, probably about doubles your tool set. But you will also notice that what you see up here on the top is the same as what you see over here on the left, plus this extra row. Okay, so about half of these tools are the same, but you just have twice as many of them. All right, so those are the extra tools that this the basic SketchUp comes with. Now you can't actually go into you can't actually go and download additional tools. There's all kinds of fantastic plugins for SketchUp. Okay, the other great plugin is the 3D Warehouse. And if you click on it, it gives you the ability to go on and download hundreds of thousands of different components that people have already created, and you can pull them into your own SketchUp model in a matter of like 2 clicks. You can also go onto your internet browser, go onto Chrome, and go to the 3dwarehouse.com, and you can access the same thing. So I frequently do that, especially when I'm doing renderings where maybe I need some things from a background that I don't really need any like large amount of detail for. I just download them, things that people have already created, and load them into my Revit model or my Lumion model or whatever I'm working on. So that's a great resource, is going to the 3D warehouse. So take some time and check that out a bit as well. So when you look at the SketchUp interface, there's a couple things to keep in mind. So the gray area represents our floor plane, okay, or our ground plane in the SketchUp environment. Out and off to the distance is going to be our horizon line, okay? It's that nice difference between the light gray area and the dark gray area. So that's our horizon line. Another thing that you'll notice is that when working in SketchUp is that everything is always in perspective mode, okay? So there's always going to be some kind of a little bit of a skew to the view a little bit, okay? You do have the ability to actually turn that off by unchecking perspective, but we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But for the most part, you always work in perspective mode, okay? So the other thing that Revit, have I been saying Revit the entire time? Okay, I just said it that one time. All right. It's a habit of mine because I just use Revit all the time. And as you know, I teach Revit as well. So the other thing about SketchUp is that it comes with this little guy. Does anyone know why this little guy is added into here? Yes.
For reference?
Scale reference. Yes, exactly. So this little guy in here is added for reference. And every single year, it's a new person. It's they have to be diverse. So last year I think it was a gal. This year it's a guy. Actually, I think last year it was like the Rosie the Riveter, wasn't it? It was the Rosie the Riveter, and they basically change the person every year. So we gotta be pleasing to all audiences. But it's just kind of a funny little aspect about it. So moving on, you'll notice that here we have a blue, a green, and a red line. Each of these lines represent a different axes that you're working on, okay? So our green and our red axes represent our ground plane, okay? So that's basically X and Y. And whereas the Z axis, up and down, the vertical dimension, is represented by the blue line. When you, for example, take your pencil up here, your pencil is gonna be your main drawing tool. That's gonna be how you draw various different shapes, okay? So that's the pencil tool. And I'm going to do this a few times, but you'll notice that when you're drawing, you'll notice that you get that same green line, okay? You also can get the same red line, and you can also get the same blue line. What that's telling you is what axes you're drawing that line in. So because you're drawing in kind of this global environment and at a perspective, sometimes it's kind of hard to understand what plane you're actually drawing on. So, like right now, that's black. That's telling me that, one, I'm not parallel to this green line, so I'm not drawing orthogonal, okay? So it's actually really good, assuming that, a lot of what you're drawing is orthogonal, that you see those different colored lines, or at least be aware of them, okay? So if I want to draw a square, I'm going to make sure I want to see that green line, then the red line, green, and then red, okay? So I know that that's a perfect square because I was drawing in parallel to each of these lines, and I saw those different reference lines, okay? So right now, because it's shown in perspective, it actually doesn't even really look like a perfect square, right? It looks like it's a little bit skewed. And if I angle my camera, it looks even more skewed. But as I orbit around and I get more at a directly above it, and like a plan view, you'll notice that it's actually the shape that you probably were originally intending to draw. Okay, so those are just a few things to keep in mind when drawing that square. Okay, so that's going to be your line tool. That's going to be just how you draw basic lines. Okay, so green axis, red axis, and then also the blue axis. Okay, so and while you're drawing, you'll notice in the very bottom right-hand corner, down over here, you're getting something that shows you the length of the line that you're drawing. Okay, so right now you can see that's 5 feet 9 3/16, and it basically will change as I move my cursor. Okay, just like AutoCAD, when you're drawing a line in AutoCAD, I can also just type in my dimension. Okay, so if I wanted to draw a square, okay, I want to make sure I see that green axis, and I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to draw a I'm going to draw a 4 foot by 4 foot cube. Okay, so I'm going to say 4 feet. All right, and I'm going to go over to the right. I can now see that red axis. I'm going to go ahead and type in 4 feet again. And I'm going to keep doing that, just like very similar to AutoCAD when we were drawing in that fashion. Okay, and you'll notice that when I enclosed that square, that it filled in gray. So when you enclose a shape all on the same plane, it's going to fill it in with a fill. Okay, and what that's telling you is that now you have the ability to create some more three-dimensional shapes with that object. Okay, so the next tool we're going to look at is going to be the push and pull tool. So up here on the upper ribbon, you'll notice that what looks like a little three-dimensional box with an arrow that says push and pull. Okay, so we're going to click on push and pull, and we are going to notice that when I hover my mouse over that shape, you'll notice that you see these little dots. Okay, that's telling you that your cursor is recognizing that that's a shape that you can extrude. And if I click down, I can now move my cursor up and down to make a three-dimensional shape. And just like when I was drawing my lines, I can also say 4 feet, and it's going to extrude that 4 feet. Okay? Everyone see how that works? So let's also look at the rectangle tool or the shapes tool. So just to the left of the push and pull tool, you'll see rectangle, circle, polygon, and something called rotated rectangle, which I can't say I've ever used before. But let's go ahead and click on rectangle. Okay, so you'll notice that as I start to draw these shapes, that you notice a couple things about the screen here. What I want you to pay attention to is this little dashed line in between that square. Can we guess what that dashed line means? What do we all think that dashed line might mean? Yeah, it's telling you that you're drawing a perfect square. So down here in the bottom right-hand corner, it's giving you a really funky dimension, 2'4" 7/8 of an inch. You likely don't want that. So just like AutoCAD, you can type in your dimensions as well. So 4 feet, comma, 4 feet. Okay, and it's going to give you the same thing as what we created with our pen tool. All right, so just like I did before, I'm going to click on Extrude. All right, I'm going to click on Extrude, and I'm going to extrude this up 4 feet. Okay, so before we move on, let's talk a little bit about what today's assignment is going to be. So, and how today's going to work is I'm actually going to let you guys, after this initial demonstration, I'm going to let you guys work for about an hour or so, hour 15 minutes, and you're going to work to finish the Francis Ching cube house. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to do a demonstration in Photoshop. Okay, I'm going to look at how we can start doing some post-production with the model that we created. But today's exercise is intended to be quick, using a very quick modular system. Okay, so if you go over to assignments and you click on exercise 26, okay, SketchUp Basics Francis Ching House, and you scroll down, you'll get a little picture of what you're going to be creating today. And your goal is going to be to replicate this image. Okay, you can see here this is a very known house. A lot of people here probably know who Francis Ching is. You probably have a couple of his books. Okay, absolutely fantastic books. These are books that we still have in my office, and we still reference them all the time. He has a variety of basic architectural construction, architectural graphics, things of that nature books. So they're actually even referenced in the architectural exams, believe it or not. So if you buy those Francis Ching books and you're like, oh my gosh, these are crazy, save them, because you'll likely use them in the future. So this is a very well-known graphic that is in one of his books. But our goal today is to replicate this house as fast as you can using this modular construction. So far, I've created 2 of these 4 foot by 4 foot cubes. So that's what this is. So each one of these cubes that my cursor is pointing to is 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. So it's an extruded 4 foot cube. And you can see here that it's broken down into some variation of that cube, okay? So over here you can see that these are probably 1 foot by 1 foot, or these are 1 foot cubes, being that they take up 1/4 of one of the larger pieces. Okay, so that's what the entire construction relates to is this grid system. Okay, so you're going to have to use this picture. Everything you see here in this picture is enough to finish the exercise. Okay, your goal should be to try to replicate this as close as you can. If you want to add anything to it and make it kind of your own, that's fine too. I don't really care about what the final outcome looks like, as long as at a minimum it looks like this. But some of you who know SketchUp well will probably finish this in 20-30 minutes. Okay, so if that's the case, add a little extra spunk to it and add a little bit. All right, so that's what we're going to try to replicate today. I'm going to create the first few pieces of it, and then I'll turn you guys loose to creating your own. All right, so back to our model. Okay, so let's look at a few more of the tools. Okay, so we've already talked about the pen tool. We've already talked about the shapes tool. And we've also talked about push and pull. Okay, so next let's look at the copy and move tools. Okay, so up here at our ribbon, you're going to see this little button here that says move. Okay, if I select one of these cubes, actually, let me back up just a tiny bit. So right now you'll notice that I'm orbiting around my cubes. You can orbit by holding down the scroll wheel. Okay, so that's the only thing I'm doing right now is holding down the scroll wheel, and I'm orbiting around those objects. Okay, you can zoom in and out simply by just scrolling on your scroll wheel. Okay, so for the most part you're just clicking and using the scroll wheel the entire time. So that's going to be how you zoom in and out, and then also orbit around your project. Okay, so now let's look at the move tool. So I'm going to select one of these cubes here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on move, and I can go ahead and move this around. And notice that as I move it around, that again we see those different axes lines. Okay, so you see that little green axis line there, you see red there, and then I can also see blue there. So now I know that I'm moving the cube up. Okay, so it's very easy to move different objects around in SketchUp. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move this cube, and I'm going to attach it to my first cube. Okay, and then now I'm going to move it again, and I want you guys to pay attention to what happens here. So now that I've attached it, you'll notice that the initial cube is now stuck to it. Okay, so and that's kind of a weird thing about SketchUp, is that you have to work in what we'll eventually know as groups and components. Okay, so without creating a group, you'll notice that as soon as you attach one thing to another thing in SketchUp, it's going to become sticky. It's not going to want to come apart. Okay, so let me just back up a little bit and let's look at the preferred way to actually do this. So the way that you will get out of doing that is if you select that initial object and you right click on it, you're going to click on make group. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other one. All right, so I'm going to select everything and I'm going to click on make group. All right, so now if I take that cube, all right, now if I take that cube and I move it and I attach it to the first one, I can now move it apart without it sticking to it. Okay, so the beauty of SketchUp in becoming really, really efficient is understanding the groups and components. We'll talk about components at a later class, so that you can easily push and pull things and copy pieces you've already created. Okay, the goal is to not be making all these tiny little custom pieces all the time. So the Francis Ching Cube House is a great practice because it allows you to use a lot of the basic tools, but it allows you to also think in modular construction. Okay, so that's the goal today. So
how do you get it to stick once you've made it unstick?
So I just did Control Z. Control Z, just like all of our other software, will just back it up. Okay, and then I pulled it apart to where it was, and I selected it and turned it into a group. Okay, so let's see what else is next. So that's going to be your group. So let's look at our Francis Ching Cube House here, and we notice that our first area is basically 8 modules long. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this over. I'm even going to select these two now, make it a little bit quicker, and we talked about moving. Now let's also talk about copying. Okay, so you could go up to Edit Copy and then click on Edit Paste. That's one way that you could do this, and then I could add it to something like that. Okay. Another way that you could do it when the move command is selected, I'm going to hold down Alt. Okay, I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard while I'm using the move tool. Actually, I'm sorry, Control. There we go. So holding down Control on the keyboard, you'll notice that it just copies whatever it is that I had selected. Okay, so again, I have the move command selected. I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm just going to simply copy that component over twice. Okay, and now our base is 8 components. Okay, and I could easily select that, and I could copy it over 8 more times. That would give us the base of our house. Okay, so move 1, 2, 3, 4. I could even speed it up a little bit, select all of them, and use the move tool, and voila. There becomes the base of the Francis Ching house. All right, and if we go back and look at our little image, we also have this little pop out here. Okay, this little triangular pop out. So let's go ahead and create that. I'm going to create that by also using 2 of my cubes, holding down Control. Let's move this out. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and just move that and use one origin to another and click it in place. Okay, so like using AutoCAD, you'll notice that it also kind of snaps into place. So it's pretty intuitive. You'll notice a lot of those features in the first couple minutes of working. Okay, so now we need to create a little bit of or we want to basically cut our cube in half at a diagonal. Okay, so I'm going to take my pen tool and I'm going to draw a line from here over to here, and then from here to there. Okay, that pink line is just telling you that you're drawing at a perfect 45-degree angle. Nope. You ever have that happen when you're about ready to sneeze and just goes away instantly? All right, there we go. Well, that just happened. Okay, so right now, if I click on these 2 cubes, you'll notice that these 2 lines that I've created aren't really affecting that cube. That's because these are currently grouped and these are separated. Okay, so if I want this line to actually split this cube in half, we're going to need to ungroup this. Okay, but to do that, we're going to right-click on the cube and we're going to click on Explode. Okay, and now you'll notice that I now have 2 different quadrants to this cube. Okay, and the thing to remember about SketchUp is that everything is broken down into basically lines and faces. Okay, so you can see that we have lines, and we have different lines and edges. Okay, lines, edges, all the same thing, and we also have faces. Okay, so you can move, push, and pull each one of those, or any line and any face on any object. Okay, and everything you create in SketchUp is some composition of those factors, or of those 2 different things. All right, so now that we've broken each of these in half, and let's explode each, I want to basically get rid of half of this. Okay, so I'm going to click on one side of this. I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard. Okay, you can now see inside. All right, I'm going to get rid of these sides as well. But notice that we still have the edges. The edges are still in place. Okay, and what we want to create right now is we want a solid face from on this panel, basically right here. And the reason why we don't have that right now is because we don't have a line that's finishing that shape. Okay, we have 1 going up, 2 going across, 1 going down, but there's not 1 connecting to here. So if I go back to my pen tool or pencil tool, I can connect those 2 shapes. And the first question I'm going to ask myself is, why didn't that finish? Well, you can see here that I actually missed it just by a hair, and I didn't actually draw it to that corner. So because that's not a solid plane, it's not going to work. So let's try that one more time. So I'm going to click on the pencil tool, and I'm going to make sure that this time I attach to that corner. All right, well, it's still not working. Why is it not working? Ah, I see. Let me back up just a few steps. I noticed that I am also, look, I'm just a hair short there. Let me back up just a tiny bit. Okay, now this time, let's just make sure that I go from one corner to this corner right here. It looks like I even did some little goof up right there, but I'm going to go back to this corner right there. All right, I'm going to do the same thing over here. Let me make sure that, let me just back up a second. I realized that I just put my cubes just a slightly off slightly off from where they should be. So let me select these two again. Let's copy them out. All right, now this time, let's make sure that my corners actually are aligned. Oh, I see. Those two aren't actually perfect. Okay, this should be fine though. All right, so I'm going to click right there. All right, this should work better now. So now I can go ahead and connect that line to there. Connect this line to over here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and explode each of these. All right, and I can start to get rid of some of these different shapes. All right, let's get rid of that one. 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 And let's finish these shapes here. So I'm going to go and connect from this corner over to this corner. Ah, there we go. So now that because those are on the same plane, it's filled in that shape and it's shown it the way that we want it to see it. Okay? So I'm going to click right there. Let's also make sure we get to the right corner. There we go. And now I have that triangular piece that we can see in the image.
How do you then delete the line?
Yeah, then I will now select these lines and I'm going to go ahead and delete them. Okay? So just a few. You can select multiple at one time. You just have to be careful because you can very easily do something like that and also select a whole bunch of other things. So just be careful on how you're selecting. All right, so now we have that little shape right there. Okay, I'm going to do just a few more pieces. All right, and let's look at how we could create this ramp. Okay, so if we look at this ramp, we notice that it's 3 modules. It's using 3 of those modules. All right, so I'm going to take my pencil tool again, and I'm going to start up here in the upper at this corner right here. And ideally, you won't have these little gaps. I just copy them over really, really quickly. So just pay a little bit extra attention to that. And I'm going to draw that line. Oh, I've kind of screwed myself here because I think they're all staggered like a...
They look stuck together, but they're not.
Let's carefully place them this time.
There's no like snap function.
It did. I was moving very quickly and I must have just missed it. Okay. Okay, that looks a little bit better. So again, I'm just going to copy these over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so let's look at this ramp. All right, that looks better. So I'm going to, again, use my line tool, and just like I did over here in this piece, I'm going to start here at the upper left-hand corner, and I'm going to draw down to the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, so right now, it's not intersecting in either of these shapes because they're all grouped. Okay, so I can go ahead and select all 3 of these shapes, and I'm going to go ahead and explode them. All right, explode. And now you can see here that it's separated each of those shapes. If you ever run into the situation where you click on one of those areas and you notice that it actually doesn't stop at the line and it actually fills up the entire area, the reason why it does that is because this line is not actually on the face. There's some kind of error in the plane that you drew on, and you'll likely encounter this today. Okay, so if you run into that problem, let me know, but that's probably what the issue is. Okay, so I want to keep the bottom half of my ramp, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of these pieces right here. All right, I can see here in the middle. Does everyone see that kind of flickering in the back right there? What that's telling you is you actually have 2 faces just intersecting each other. Okay, so I can actually click on one of them and delete it, and I'm still going to see the face of the grouped cube in the back. Okay, so from here I can go ahead and draw a line. Let's actually get rid of some of these uppers as well, and I'm going to draw a line from this corner over to this corner. All right, and you'll see that it's completed that rectilinear shape. Okay, and now I can go through and get rid of the lines that I don't need. Okay? And there we have our ramp. So that's one piece. So there's one more tool I want to show you, and that's going to be the offset tool. So I'm going to go ahead and create just a couple of these little pieces for this doorway. Okay? So what we need for this doorway is basically a smaller derivative of our original cube. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and create a 1 foot by 1 foot cube that I can use for this doorway. Okay? So I'm going to take one of my cubes, and let's take one that's already grouped, and I'm going to copy it out, and let's create a couple of, let's create a couple other modules that we can use here. So I'm going to use my pen tool, and notice that my cursor snaps to the midpoint, so that's great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and draw, I'm going to split this into 4s. All right, let's ungroup this, or explode it. And let's finish breaking this down into a couple of the smaller pieces. Okay, don't need these pieces anymore. All right, let's make the back ends over here. So we're just gonna go finish that. So that's gonna be 1 foot. Or no, 2 foot. There we go. So that filled that in, that fills that in. There we go. Now I can get rid of the upper half. And there is a new cube. So now that I've created this little 2 foot, or this 2 foot cube, what do you think the next step would be to start to move it on top of our platform?
How come we went through all of that? Why didn't you just make a 2 foot cube?
You could have also done that.
Oh.
You're probably right. That's probably, you know,
Okay.
now that you bring that up, that's probably the better way to do that. You could also use the scale tool, which is this one right here, okay, and you could reduce it by 50% of the size, okay. There's a, you know, like some of the other software we've done, there's several ways to complete multiple these different actions. You're right. That probably would have been the faster thing to do, is just to create a quick little 2 foot cube, okay. So I've created that, and I'm now going to select it, and I'm going to group it, okay, so that I can easily copy it onto my platform without it sticking to the other pieces, okay. So it looks like we want to put it over here on the beginning or the other corner of our, let's see, 1, 2, it looks like the 3rd cube. So I'm going to go ahead and move this onto right there. All right, and if we go look back, it looks like we have 2 little spaces. We're going to move this one over here, and now we can select both of these, and we can go ahead and just copy it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's like 6 modules. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modules. So we can get rid of the upper one. Okay, so that looks good. I can go ahead and select all of those cubes, and I'm going to copy them over. There we go. And I can even take just one of these, and I'm going to start to make the door. So the door is going to be the last thing that I'm going to build, and so that I could show you the offset tool. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move. Let's copy that over twice. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and explode all of these objects. And I'm going to get rid of all of the lines here in the middle, so that I just have a single plane to work with. See, like that. That's what my ultimate goal is, but for the entire space. Okay, and now what I'm going to show you is the offset tool. And then what we're going to create is we're going to create a frame around that door. So I want to basically offset, just like in AutoCAD, using the offset tool, and I want to offset a nice even frame around that door. All right, so I'm going to go up here to this tool right here. This is going to be your offset tool. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go up to any of the edges. And what we want to see is that stipple pattern. Okay, that stipple pattern means that we're offsetting on the right plane. That's the plane that I want to offset. I'm going to click on that, and notice that as I move my cursor in, that it creates an offsetted line from that edge. Okay, and just like when we're drawing our lines, I could say, okay, I want a nice 6-inch frame around my door, 6 inches, and voila. And now we have two different spaces, okay? And if I want to continue to add more depth and more dimension to it, I can continue by using my push and pull tool. I could either pull this out a little bit, all right, or I could push this in a tiny bit, all right, so that the frame actually has a little bit of depth. So whatever way you want to do that, that is up to you, okay? So that's about it for what I'm going to show you. I will go ahead and put a full size, the completed model up here on the screen so you guys don't have to reference the tiny little thing on canvas, although that's an option. But let's go ahead and spend the next hour working on this, okay? If you finish early, kudos to you. That means that you're doing well. If you finish within that hour, that's about what you want to be finishing this at. Okay, so your goal is to try to recreate this as close as possible. And you'll realize that as you start moving through it, you'll start going faster and faster and faster because you've already created all of the little different pieces. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording for now. Okay, so some of you may already have this. Some of you maybe are close to having this. But this is going to be our end result. Okay, we're going to look at a few more different tools in SketchUp, and that are all going to focus around the post-production aspect of this exercise. Okay, so here we have our Francis Ching house, and actually Maria asked the question, how do you get rid of these little dark segments in between the intersections? Well, this is actually the traditional kind of SketchUp look, and the reason why actually some people really like it is because it kind of reminds them of the old sketchy look that hand drafters used to draw. So, like for example, my boss, when he's drawing a floor plan, he always draws lines like this, and then he'll do this. He never lets two lines come to a point. They always would intersect each other. And that's the way that hand drafters always drew back in the old days. They drew quick. They drew quick, and they didn't have time to slow it down to get to the point. Yeah, and there was a reason for that. But so a lot of people like kind of that loose, sketchy look of the drawing, hence the name SketchUp. So this is going to be the default style that SketchUp gives you, but you do actually have control of how this actually looks, and that's what we're going to look at today, is how we can export this in a variety of different fashions so that we can get a look that doesn't look like SketchUp. And I promise you by the end of this semester, once we actually start to go work into Photoshop, your rendering will not look like it came from SketchUp, which is the goal. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to find an optimal view that you want to take, that you want to do a post-production of your house. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of get an area that I like. Okay, let's make this a little bit smaller too. Okay, so I'm going to get an area that I like. I'm just going to say something about like that. I want the building to be kind of centered in my screen, and I want to have a little bit of area off to the sides. Okay. And as soon as I get that, I'm going to go over to where it says scenes, okay? I'm going to go over to where it says scenes, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and click on the plus button, okay? I'm going to click on plus, and you'll see here that it's now added a little thumbnail of what I had here on my screen, okay? I can go ahead and double click on this. Actually, I got to scroll down towards the bottom. Let's see, where is it? I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to click on rename scene. Okay, I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to call this, we'll say main view. Okay, and good. So now, if I was to move this around, and let's say I look at it, blah blah blah, I can now go back and I can click or double click on scene 1, and it's going to automatically bring me back to where it was. Okay, so you're saving these different vantage points around your model. So you could go to do one over here. You say, okay, let's do more of a human level perspective. All right, I like that. I could save that. Let's do one maybe where I'm walking up the steps. And you could kind of move this around accordingly. All right. All right, I like that one. Plus, I now have these different scenes. And now I could double click on them and I could go from scene to scene. This actually works pretty well for like a presentation in front of a client, whereas I can go around to the different saved areas. Okay. I don't need these, so I'm going to go ahead and delete them. Okay. I want to stick with the original one that I created. So as soon as you're happy with that particular view, we can start to work on the variety of different exports that we're going to create to make this a really nice and dynamic rendering. Okay, so earlier Maria asked the question, well, how do we get rid of this kind of very sketchy, weird look where you have these really bold intersections? Well, if you go over here to where it says Styles, okay, I'm going to go ahead and click on the little drop-down menu of Styles. This is where we can start to edit the way that this SketchUp model looks. Okay, so I'm going to go into, let's say, default styles. Okay, and you'll notice that if I click on these, depending on the one that I click on, I get a very different look. Okay, so they all have different looks. That's wireframe. This is a, what is that called? Woodworking style. There's just a whole bunch of them, shaded with textures. All right, you'll notice that these ones though actually got rid of that little, that little crisscross bold intersection that we didn't like. All right, I can go back and I can click on some of the other sketchy edges. So these are all very similar to the kind of the one that we were working with, but these all have a very loose, sketchy view to them. Okay, and even other programs, even Revit has a setting now that you can click a button and it makes it look like SketchUp. Because there actually are a lot of people that do like this. They do like that ability for it to look loose and not finished. It's not like AutoCAD or Revit, that Revit looks very finished and very technical.
You can turn AutoCAD sketchy.
I know you can, that's what I just said. So, and so Revit, yes, changed, they made a button so that it looks sketchy. So, but some people like that. So I'll let you take a few moments to look at the different styles that you have available to you. But today we're going to export a variety of different views using different styles. Okay, so the first one that we're going to create, and this process you'll want to revert back to either the video or you can click on the link on exercise 26. There's a link here that I believe it's SketchUp 4.3 or 4.3 through 4.5 will give you the different steps that you'll need to take to get the end result, or you can watch the video. Okay, the video is probably a little more easy to follow. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my first scene, and what I want to do is I'm going to go over to default styles, and I'm going to click on, let's see, where is it? Default's the one that we were looking at originally. I want to click on the one that says hidden line. Okay, hidden line gives me a very basic white and black line view. Okay, we don't have the sketchiness look. It's just very straightforward, white background, white faces, nothing else. Okay, so before I export this view, I want to get rid of my guides. All right, so I'm going to go up to view. I'm going to turn off the guides. I'm also going to turn off the axes. Okay, and if you had section cuts, you would turn those off as well. You likely don't have them though, unless you took some time to create them. But my first view that I want to export is going to be this very basic white background, white faced view. Okay, now I know some of you that know SketchUp well will also possibly take the time to use the paint bucket and add some color and some texture to your faces. I'm going to ask that you not do that for this. If you want to do it in your own time on your own project, by all means, but for what we're doing in this class, I'm going to ask that you don't do it. I always have a couple people every class that instead of applying their materials in Photoshop, they apply it in SketchUp because they think it's quicker and easier. You're right, it probably is, but I can always tell that it's SketchUp. And for me, that's the whole goal of what the exercise is. We're trying to make it not look so SketchUp-y. Okay, so I promise you that by using Photoshop to do things like the perspectives and the elevations and the floor plans, you'll get a much more realistic look, okay? And it won't look so SketchUp-y, okay? So that's the goal. Sometimes using the paint bucket and adding your colors and materials works really good, but just not for what we're doing today. All right, so as soon as you get this first view established, I'm going to go over to File, and I'm going to go over to Export, and I'm going to go down to 2D Graphic. All right, I'm going to click on 2D Graphic. All right, and before I save this to my thumb drive, let's go ahead and find my folder, so week 14B. And before I click Export, I'm going to click on Options, okay? So by default, it says use screen size 690 pixels by 590 pixels. It's a very small JPEG. If you try to put this, that's probably about the equivalent of about a 2-inch by 2-inch image once you were to put it inside like InDesign or something like that. So the way that you can think of this is if I want, let's say, a 300 DPI image, so if it's 300 DPI and I want it to fill we'll say an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, well, what is 8 inches by 300, okay? Or what is 10 inches by 300? That'd be 3,000 pixels. So that's telling you that at that pixel ratio, that would fit nicely on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So with that said, I'm going to say that I would rather you uncheck view size, and I'm going to go ahead and type in 3,000 pixels. All right. If you want to do larger, you can. One of the pros or one of the positive attributes of SketchUp Pro is I think you can go up to 9,999 pixels. Okay, so you can do a pretty nice export. Whereas I think SketchUp Make will probably limit you to about half that. It's been a while since I've actually tried though, so maybe someone will figure that out over the next couple days and let me know. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 3,000 pixels. That will be plenty for what we're doing today. And then by default, because it keeps the screen ratio, it'll automatically adjust the height. So all you need to do is type in 3,000 on the width, and the height will automatically change. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Make sure I'm recording that. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And let's call this first view Francis Ching House. I'm going to say Hidden Line. Okay, and I'm going to hit Export. And we're done. So the key to moving on with this is to not move the view. If you don't move the view and you leave it exactly the same on each one of the views, when you layer them in Photoshop, they're going to stack right on top of each other perfectly. Okay. The goal is that when you bring it into Photoshop, you have the ability to control the different layers individually versus just adding shadows, adding lines, adding all the things that you want in one view and then exporting it. So our goal is so that we want to have more visual freedom to manipulating these individual layers, okay? So the next one that I'm going to create is I'm going to create an X-ray view of this, okay? So to do this, I'm going to go over to Edit, and I'm going to click on this little button right here that says Face Settings, and I'm going to click on X-ray, okay? And now you can see that you can actually see inside of the house, okay? Now, this is a very basic modular house. There's not really anything going on, but you could see where that could start to become really useful. And I actually did this one time when I was in grad school, and I had a teacher that absolutely loved it because I actually modeled the interior of this building to the T, and they're like, okay, they can actually start to get an understanding of how the outside related to the inside. So it's kind of a cool way to blend a view is using this X-ray mode. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and export this one as well, just as is. Again, not moving the screen. File, Export, 2D Graphic. And if I go to Options, it'll automatically have saved your last setting, so you don't need to mess with that again. All right, so I'm going to call this Francis Ching House X-ray. All right, and I'm going to click on Export. All right, so now I can turn off that X-ray, all right, and I am going to create a shadows only layer, okay? Now I'm showing you about 4 or 5 different techniques to export. Ultimately, how you want to export them is okay. I'd recommend at least hidden line, at least shadows, and if you want to do a couple others that are up to you, that you want to change, that's good. I'd say hidden line though and the shadows are 2 critical layers. But ultimately, if you want to combine 4 or 5 different different images, that's great. So my goal though is I just want you to know that you can layer these how you choose, okay? And by exploring the different styles and the different face settings, you might get some really cool really cool effects that you can ultimately layer inside of Photoshop. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some shadows to this. All right. So I am going to minimize styles for just for a second, and I'm going to go over to shadows, and I'm going to expand that. Okay. And a nice thing about this is that you can specify the time, the time or the date, the time, and you can get shadows based off of the time of the day. Okay, I think there are also plugins to where you can even put in your geolocation, and it'll give you the shadows based off of where you actually are. So that becomes helpful if you're actually doing a project in Pleasant Hill, and you can type in the coordinates, and you can actually get shadows that actually would give you a shadow or a sun study of your actual house. So that's kind of a cool feature. So I'm going to turn on shadows right here by clicking this button. All right. So you can see here that I have shadows based off of about noon in October at a certain time. Okay, so you can adjust these however you wish. There's not really a specific setting that is perfect. I'm just going to pick one that I'm going to say about like that. That looks pretty good. I have kind of a moderate amount of shadows on my building. Okay, so I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize shadows. Okay, I'm going to minimize shadows. I'm going to go back over to styles, and I am going to go back to right here where it says edge settings. So it's under edit. I'm going to go to edge settings, and I'm going to turn off edges. Okay, notice that I still have all my shadows though. Okay, and that's what we want. Okay, the goal is that when we bring it into Photoshop, I now have my own layer of shadows that I can manipulate without worrying about messing up any of the other layers. Okay, so I'm going to go click on edit, and then I'm going to turn off edges. If profiles is selected, you'll want to uncheck that as well. And so as soon as I uncheck edges and all I see are my shadows and my faces, I'm going to go ahead and export this again. So export 2D graphic, and I'm going to say Francis Ching house shadows. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to create one more export for my layering. Okay, whatever you want to choose is fine. I'm going to turn back on edges. I'm going to turn off shadows. Okay, and let's just pick another one that's kind of fun. So I'm going to go to select, and I'm going to go back from default styles. Let's pick a sketchy one. One that I like to use is actually pen gray. Let's see, where is it? Sometimes I forget where it is. Watercolor, that's also a good one. Wires. It's kind of fun. Sometimes I kind of start looking at all of them. Let's use that one right there. Okay, I'm going to use this permanent marker fine. Okay, I like that. That'll be a nice little layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do File, Export, 2D Graphic, Francis Ching house. What do we call this? What was it? What was it called? Permanent marker? We'll just call it marker. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit export. So I've created 4 layers that I'm going to bring into Photoshop and overlay on top of each other. Okay, if you want to create more, you can, up to you. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. Give that a second to open up. And I'm going to start to layer all 4 of my slides every time. Every time these images pop up. I literally uploaded these to Photoshop 2 years ago, and they still pop up every time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go File, Open, and I'm going to go find those images. I'm going to open them up in the order that I saved them. If you don't, not a big deal. You can always rearrange them in your layers accordingly. Okay, so I'm going to go to File. Let's see, Week 14B. I'm going to start with Hidden Line, Open. Okay, so there's that view. I'm now going to go to File, Place, and I'm going to select my next one. So we have X-ray, place on top of that. Okay, go ahead and hit the check mark. That looks good. I'm going to go File, Place again. Let's take shadows. Okay, perfect, check mark. All right, and then File, Place one more time, and the marker. Okay, so those have all they're all currently laying directly on top of each other. So right now, I can't see any of the layers behind. So if you look back to when we were talking about Photoshop, what was the tool that we learned that would maybe allow this to become more transparent? Any guesses? It's not the, yes, I guess you could just reduce the opacity. There's actually a better tool though. So you're talking about blending modes. Yes, you're correct. So it's not overlay. We're not going to use overlay today, but I know you were hinting towards blending mode. So do we recall what blending mode made everything that was white transparent? Ding, 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 ding. Multiply, yeah. So I'm going to take each of my layers that I have here, all right, and I'm going to go ahead and apply a multiply blending mode, okay? Notice that as I added that to the first one, I can now see my shadows, okay? I go to the second layer, I add multiply, I can now see my X-ray, okay? So I now have 3 of those exports now layering, all right? Lastly, go to the third one, multiply, and I can now see the hidden line below. So what's nice about having these individual layers is that I can now control each of them how I wish. So if I think that the sketchiness of the marker is maybe a little bit too intense, well, I can click on marker here and I could reduce the opacity a little bit. I could say maybe I only want that to be like 60%. Okay, well that reduced it just a tiny bit. Maybe I don't want it to be, I don't want the X-ray to be quite so evident. Okay, I can go to X-ray right here and I could say 50%. Whoops, I think I typed in 0.5. So 50%, okay, and now I could barely see that X-ray, okay? So I think you're starting to get the picture here, all right? You can go ahead and start to manipulate each of these layers how you wish, okay? So the next thing that I want to do is I want to start to add some gradient to my shadows, okay? I want to start to make the shadows not look so flat, okay? Now, if you didn't export this, if you were to export just the original hidden line view with the shadows, you wouldn't be able to manipulate this quite as freely as if you did them individually, okay? So with my shadow layer selected, I'm going to go ahead and use the dodge and burn tool, okay? I'm going to go ahead and use the dodge and burn tool so that I can add some intensity and also lighten some certain areas to make these shadows look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to select my shadows layer and let's see who can remember how to do the dodge and burn tool correctly. Anybody want to refresh my memory on the next step for dodge and burn? What kind of a layer do we need to add? Yeah, new layer. So we're going to go to layer, new, layer. All right, let's call this dodge and burn. Now what would be the next step?
Make the color 50 gray and make the mode overlay?
Correct. So we're going to go to mode, overlay, and we're going to check the box that says fill with overlay neutral color. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. All right, we also talked about a command where you can make the layer above another one specifically only apply to the one below it. Does anyone remember that shortcut? Great shortcut.
Yes.
Control Alt.
Or just right click on the layer that you want and say create clipping mask.
Create clipping mask.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that will also do it. Control Alt G is the shortcut for that. Okay, so you can do Control Alt G, and now that layer is only going to apply to my shadows layer. So you can see now that if those weren't separated, you'd be applying that dodge and burn to both of those layers, or to the combined layer. So now that I have that dodge and burn, I can go over to, let's see, the dodge and burn tool right here. So I'm going to go to burn, all right, and I can start to add a little bit of gradient to some of these areas. Okay, so I'm going to kind of burn, let's see, a little bit right here. All right, maybe it's extra dark right in this area. So, and if I turn off all these other layers, whoops, not my shadows. All right, you can see here where you're kind of working a little bit. So it doesn't even matter if I click up here because there's no shadow there. I'm not actually adding anything to the white. All right, but I can go through here and let's make this brush a little bit bigger. And I can add some gradient to these areas to make this look a little bit more lifelike. Okay.
Only work on the shadow area.
Right, because there's actually there's some color there, so it won't work on just the white because it's not necessarily adding gray. It's just deepening the tone, so it can't deepen the tone of the white. Okay, so it's a little blotchy, but that's okay. I think you guys get the point here a little bit. So I can go over here, start to add a little bit of that detail. All right, that looks good over here. All right, great. Maybe we change this to the dodge tool. It's a lot bigger. All right, kind of soften these edges a little bit. Okay, so just a couple of different ideas. Okay, the more, obviously, a little bit more time, you could make that look a little bit nicer. All right, if I turn on all of my layers, you can see here that I have a very interesting looking house. Okay, it certainly looks a lot better than what we just originally started with. Okay, so think of, as you're choosing your different layers, think about what you want the final result to look like. Okay, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of experimentation, and maybe you export 10 different views and you load them all in. Okay, and then you can turn them all, you can turn some of them on, some of them off, and you kind of see how they start to interact with each other. Okay, so go ahead and think about that. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys continue, and then your end result, what you want to turn in, is basically this image right here. So as soon as you're done, save this as a PDF. Save as PDF. So Photoshop PDF, where'd it go? Right there. You can also just save it as a Photoshop file because you can drop a Photoshop file right into InDesign in your title block. All right, and I'm going to call this Francis Ching House Final. And we'll go ahead and save that. Okay, if I hit Save PDF, it'll actually retain a lot of the Photoshop editing capabilities. Okay, so this is what your end goal is, to turn in a nice dynamic looking rendering using the different tools that we just talked about. Okay, so if you're not done with creating the house, finish doing that and then move on to the Photoshop aspect. And that's it.